So thank you for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. I'm going to show a small selection of documents from the English East India Company archive held at the British Library, which tell the story of the company in Japan 1613 to 1623. The volumes of original East India Company minutes, correspondence and factory records have been published as a digital collection by Adam Matthew, and normally they are available to view free of charge at the British Library. But unfortunately, as you may have heard, all electronic resources at the library are currently closed down because of a massive cyber attack. So please don't come and see them just yet. Transcripts of all the documents you will see were published by the late, great Anthony Farrington in 1991. Here are his 2 volumes of The English Factory in Japan, which include documents from the British Library, the Bodleian Library, the Dutch Archives at The Hague, the National Archives of the UK, the University of Minnesota, Kent Record Office, and Tokyo. There are biographical notes and other useful appendices. Now, some of the documents I'm going to be showing are faded or damaged, but always remember that Anthony Farrington has done the work for you and deciphered them. So our story, as Tim has told you, begins with the decision of the East India Company in 1611 to send a ship to Japan with the aim of settling a factory, that is, a trading post. The Dutch had been operating a factory at Hirado since 1609. The company wanted a new market for English woolen cloth in return for Japanese silver to exchange for spices in Java. The company's governor, Sir Thomas Smith, wrote to William Adams informing him that a ship would arrive in Japan in 1613. As we've heard, Adams had been in Japan since 1600, and the company hoped to benefit from his long experience there. Now, my first document is the text of the letter sent by King James I to the Emperor of Japan, dated 1611, which Tim spoke about. And this one has been copied into the company's minute book in London. The original was carried by Saris in the Clove. And in this version, King James said that he had heard of the Emperor's power and dominion, and so had encouraged his subjects to undertake a voyage to Japan to solicit friendship and amity, and to encourage the exchange of commodities for mutual profit. He did not doubt that his people would be greeted with kindness and that they would be afforded royal protection for settling a factory with security and liberty of commerce. In return, James offered the liberty of his kingdoms for any Japanese voyager wanting to have communication. The East India Company archive contains 9 of William Adams' letters, plus a contract signed by him. To mark the 400th anniversary of his death in 2020, images of these documents were added to the British Library's digitised manuscripts free resource. The original of Adams' letter to his wife Mary, dated about 1605, has not survived, but a 17th century published version exists, and the text is included in Anthony Farrington's book. On the left of the slide is a letter from William Adams at Hirado to East India Company merchant Augustus Spalding at Bantam in Java, dated the 12th of January 1613, 5 months before the arrival of the Clove. Adams wrote of how the Dutch had been intercepting his letters, although he had received a few from his wife and from friends in England and Holland. He had told the Emperor about the letters sent to him by Sir Thomas Smith and the expected arrival of an English ship hoping to trade. The Emperor was very pleased. Adams told Spalding, "I may boldly say our countrymen shall be so welcome and free in comparison as in the River of London." Adams gave Spalding an overview of the current situation in Japan, as well as detailed commercial intelligence about the goods being sold in Japan by the Dutch, saying that merchandise from China, such as silk, made a good profit. The charges in Japan were not great, but presents needed to be given to the Emperor and others. Adams recommended that the company's ship should not go to Hirado, where the Dutch were established. He said that Hirado was a bad place to sell goods, and it would be better to sail to the east, where the Emperor had his court, and to ask for Adams there. I am called in the Japanese tongue Anjin Sama. Adams' advice was ignored. He also asked Spalding to arrange for Sir Thomas Smith in London to lend his wife £20. The image on the right comes from the Journal of the Clove kept by John Saris. This entry dates from June 1613, when the ship arrived at Hirado, and tells of Saris's first encounter with the local Japanese daimyo and his grandson, described by Saris as the old king and the governor. Cyrus presented King James's letter, but the daimyo would not open it until the Anjin, William Adams, arrived to interpret it. The English captain entertained his guests with a banquet of several conserves and a consort of good music, which apparently gave great pleasure. Seeking suitable presents for the officials was always an important consideration for the English merchants in Japan. Here are the gifts chosen with care for the daimyo and his grandson in June 1613. Most are pieces of different types of cloth, wool, cotton, silk and damask, but also 2 barrels of gunpowder and 2 gilt plate cups. This is the contract made between William Adams and the East India Company, dated Hirado on the 24th of November 1613. After much negotiation, a salary of £100 per annum was agreed for Adams, to be paid at the end of 2 years, or when news of the arrival of the clove in England was received. In the meantime, Adams could request £20 for clothes or other necessities. Adams promised not to trade for his own personal benefit by land or sea if it would be prejudicial to the company. Here is an accounting record for the voyage of the clove to Japan, an inventory general of all moneys, plate and merchandise received by Richard Cox, Cape Merchant, that is, Chief Merchant. These are the entries for April 1611, when the Clove, Hector and Thomas sailed from England under Cyrus, and for November 1613, showing Japanese goods bought from William Adams for the company factory: trunks, scritors, that's writing desks, tables and boxes. In October 1613, the retired shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu, William Adams' patron, granted privileges to the East India Company. He gave the company free license to come into Japanese ports with ships and merchandise and to reside there, buy, sell and barter. There was to be free custom of all merchandise brought to Japan, and the emperor's subjects were there to help ships in danger. Tokugawa Ieyasu's reply to King James's letter, or maybe not written by him as we've just heard, but his letter was written in the same month, and it spoke of a desire for friendship between the two nations. He expressed his admiration for the navigational skills of the English sailors, having with much facility discovered a country so remote, being no whit amazed with the distance of so mighty a gulf, nor the greatness of such infinite clouds and storms from prosecuting honourable enterprises of discoveries and merchandising. When John Cyrus sailed from Japan in December 1613, he left behind 7 men at the Hirado factory: Richard Cox, Tempest Peacock, Richard Wickham, William Eaton, Walter Carwarden, Edmund Sayers and William Neilson. 2 more men arrived in the Hacienda in August 1615, John Osterwick and Richard Hudson. Some of these merchants were sent to the principal cities of Japan with cargoes of goods. The Clove left behind a stock of woolen broadcloth, Indian fabrics, ivory, pepper, gunpowder, lead, tin, cannons with shot, gold and oil. However, Adams had told Cyrus that these were not very vendible in Japan. Other merchants, assisted by Adams, tried to establish trade with other regions to procure goods popular in Japan. Voyages were made to Cochin China, that is present-day Vietnam, Korea and Siam, hoping that these places might be a source of Chinese silk, since there was no direct English trade with China. And on the right, you see the revised privileges granted in October 1616 by Shogun Tokugawa Hidetada. And these state that English ships arriving in Japan should go to Hirado as soon as possible and not trade elsewhere, a limitation which damaged the company's already faltering sales. If the emperor needed anything which was brought on English ships, it was to be reserved for him. In March 1614, Tempest Peacock and Walter Carwarden went in a chartered Japanese junk to Cochin China. William Adams' letter, here shown on the left, dated 26th of July 1614, reported some very bad news to Richard Wickham. In the version of events told to Adams, Peacock had been murdered when returning by river from the ruler's palace with several Dutch merchants. Their boat was rammed and overturned, apparently in revenge for an earlier Dutch attack on a local village. The Europeans had been cut to pieces in the water. Carl Warden had stayed in the junk, and so Adams hoped he was still alive. Unfortunately, later reports suggested that Carl Warden had been lost at sea in a storm. Certainly nothing more was heard of him. Trade to Cochin China continued to be pursued after this disaster. The document on the right is the cargo selected for a voyage to Cochin China made by Edmund Sayers in 1618, with William Adams as pilot. It carried cloth, Russia hides, guns, ivory, copper, looking glasses, knives, and amber beads. The company documents tell us something about the Japanese families of the Englishmen based at Hirado. Adams, Eaton, and Sayers all had children born in Japan. But they also show how the men tried to maintain contact with their families in England. Here are two letters written by Richard Wickham to his mother and aunt in June 1617. Wickham was at Bantam, having left Japan in February that year. He believed that a letter from his mother had gone astray, but complained that he had not heard from any friends or relations since he left England. Did they suppose he was dead? Wickham had asked the company for permission to return to England, wearied with the most unquiet and troublesome service by means of some persons which the honourable company hath employed these ways. He sent his mother a gift of cloth and commended himself to a number of named friends and relations, even though they seemed to have forgotten him. Wickham did not succeed in returning to England. He died at Bantam in the autumn of 1618. A detailed inventory of his personal belongings was taken, and here are two extracts from the 8-page list. They show silk, satin and damask cloths, lace, a box for incense, Japanese platters, 58 books, great and small, basins and ewers, hats, a pistol, a rapier and dagger, charcoal braziers, a silver teapot and cup, a brass astrolabe, a pair of compasses and a ruler. The value of Wickham's estate was £1,400, and the company suggested that such a fortune could only have been made by illicit trading, using its own capital, or by theft. William Adams had kept in touch with his wife Mary in England and had made arrangements to pass money to her. Here is an acknowledgement by Hugh Moore, purser of the ship Moon, for £50 given to him by Richard Cox in 1622, which was to be paid to Mary Adams. William Adams, as we'd heard, died in 1620, but Cox was ensuring that money owed to him was paid to his widow. There are a few documents in Japanese in the East India Company records relating to the Japan factory. Facsimiles are reproduced in Anthony Farrington's book. Here is one example, a bill of lading for sappan wood at Hirado in 1616. Other examples include invoices, a certificate for a loan, and letters from officials and innkeepers. The closure of the factory at Hirado had been recommended in December 1621 by company merchants writing from Batavia to London. The long delays in communication between Asia and England meant that the end did not come until 1623. And here are two extracts from business minutes between July and December 1623, recording the dissolution of the Hirado factory. The Japan merchants received a letter from the company's president and council to Batavia to wind up affairs at Hirado and leave on the ship which had delivered the instructions, the Bull. The reasons given for withdrawal are the danger of the seas between Japan and Batavia, the unlikelihood of establishing trade to China, the expense of maintaining the Japan factory and the small profit made, the loss of a company ship on a voyage from England, meaning that there were no goods to supply the Japan factory. Local officials advised that one or two Englishmen needed to go to the Emperor to ask his permission to leave. Presents from the Emperor and the nobility would be required. Richard Hudson was sent to the court at Miyako in August 1623 with gifts of velvet, damask, satins, taffetas and linen. In December 1623, it was decided it was not worthwhile leaving someone behind to try to collect outstanding debts. So an arrangement was made with the head of the Dutch factory to recover them. And so the factory at Hirado closed 400 years ago this month. The remaining merchants, Cox, Eaton, Hudson, Ostwick and Sayers, left Japan. Cox died in March 1624 on the voyage homeward and never knew of the East India Company's verdict that his mismanagement had wasted £4,000. The company's commercial need for detailed written reports from their servants overseas means that a wealth of information has survived about the Japan venture. We can learn about Japanese trade, politics and society through the prism of the European merchants' words. We can also catch insights into the personalities and private lives of the company's men at the factory. It was a truly fascinating 10-year adventure. Thank you.